So welcome everyone, excited to see you. I'm Molly Zeff for those I haven't gotten to meet yet, and excited to see such a good crowd tonight. I want to welcome y'all to film discussion on what killed Michael Brown, and thank everyone for coming, especially on the night of the State of the Union. One of the things that was most challenging for me about choosing to do this film is that, at the end of the day, we are talking about the death of a teenager, and it's a very serious issue, no matter what you believe about what happened or why. And so I just want to kind of honor that and reflect on that this is someone's son, someone's brother, someone's cousin, and just keep that in mind as well in our comments that, that we are talking about a very big, serious societal issue. And also at the end of the day, also about a very serious issue for a family as well. So with that in mind, in terms of why we chose the film, why don't you take it away, Liz, with the first question?
Okay. So to get right into it, let's start off by talking about why is this film important to watch as part of Braver Angels? Does anyone see the why? Why did you feel like this particular film was important as part of the broader Braver Angels sort of media and things that we consume here? Anybody want to jump in on that one? Okay, I see a couple hands. Marilyn Berberick, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was very impressed with this film. I thought it was so nuanced. I felt like I agreed with some of the things. I needed to hear more about some of the things. Other things seemed contrary to what I'd heard. And I thought, this is something I'd really like to hear from more people about their take on it. And also just going all the way back to the incident in Ferguson to where we are today, so much has evolved. And I think people's thinking has changed over time too. So it just seemed like there's a lot of grist for conversation on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that observation to get us going. Next, I see Angela. Angela, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat some of what she said, but it was just, I heard not entirely new, but okay, so I've heard indictments of the liberal approach to fixing social justice issues. In fact, my son last year sent me 2 books to read that kind of supported that notion. But he just put it all together in ways that the sum total of it had a very profound effect. It was just very, I just learned a lot of stuff. I have all new ways of looking at things that I've lived through for the last, 50 years or so. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, it puts things in a little bit of a different context, I think, is how it impacted me for sure. Okay, Stephen Gartland, see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. I thought it was fairly well balanced, actually. That's what attracted me to keep watching. I was really intrigued by the director. It felt like he, in a sense, he was pulling back the lens quite a bit and taking in a lot more of the context and not necessarily things that like a Hollywood producer that's all polished would dive into. It seemed like he just had a laid back, well balanced viewpoint. Now he's still at a point of view, obviously, and he started to bring that in about 2/3 of the way through. And I think, the truth, what is the truth? I mean, the truth is obviously somewhere in between all these things. But I give him credit, and I'd highly recommend the film to friends of mine, just to give much different perspective and to come in with more of a balanced sense of what really happened there and how do we get at the truth.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yes. And we're going to, one of our questions will be around that poetic versus objective truth later. So if people want to be thinking about that as well. And then we'll take Kathleen and then Sheila, and then we might move on to a different question. Is that good, Molly? Okay. All right. So Kathleen.
Okay. I think in the context of the Braver Angels mission, I think this was a really important film in part because it, to me, showed how quickly a storyline, a truth emanates across an entire planet quite rapidly and quite quickly before people can bring that objective truth to the spreading of the message. And so it's a very good and pertinent example of how much trouble we get in if that story gets out before that objective truth shows up. And I think to resolve the issues at the heart of the entire film, allowing that poetic truth to take over doesn't necessarily, as the film sort of summarized, it really gets in the way of getting to the root of the problem.
Yes, thank you for that. And then I see Mr. Zellinger, and then we will move on to Butch as well, since he's the last one with his hand up. So you don't look like a Sheila, but maybe I'm jumping to conclusions.
I'm Ray. I'm Sheila's husband.
Hi, Ray.
Regarding the previous speaker's comment, there's an old saying that a lie travels around the world before the truth gets its boots on in the morning. That said, we watched this several months ago and have recommended to a number of people. I think one of the good things that exposing this to the Braver Angels folks is it's difficult for conservative Black intellectuals to have their message heard. I mean, how many people have read Thomas Sowell's writing? And yet the man is a prolific, very profound, deep thinker. Shelby Steele, similarly. Jason Riley, similarly. And I could go on with the list. But these people have very difficult time unless someone knows of them and goes to the places where you can find their writings, typically their personal websites. So I think to put it in different terms, I think exposing this is I would call it a mitzvah.
Yes, thank you for that. And I believe they had trouble platforming this film. They went back and forth with Amazon a bit.
Yes,
I paid $8 for it.
If you recommend it to anybody, Amazon takes 50% of the gate, while Vimeo, which also has the film, gives 90% to the filmmaker. So recommend that people watch it on Vimeo.
Okay, very good recommendation. Okay, and then Butch, and then we'll move on to our next question.
Thank you. I've actually done a lot of reading before this, studying on this subject, and I love the way you put it all together. And I wrote down one sentence which captures what my objective is. It was, quote, "Why is it so hard to see the truth?"
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. That is the question, I guess, right? We talk about that in a lot of different forums here at Braver Angels, I think. So yes, for sure. All right, Molly, let's move on to the next question.
All right. Well, per some of the intentions that I try to put at a high level at the beginning, the next question is about the discomfort that the film may or may not cause for folks. So yeah, this is more about you and your reaction than it is about some of the substance of the film, although definitely please bring in the substance as it's relevant. And that question is, what made you uncomfortable about the film during it or afterwards? What was the discomfort? What was the source of discomfort? What made you uncomfortable here? And as a little bit of a corollary, why do people have fear of discussing topics in this film? But let's start with the discomfort. Yeah, go for it, Craig.
Hi. So I really enjoyed this film very much, and it was, as others have said, I thought it was very powerful, actually, and I think he made a very compelling case. The one thing that made me uncomfortable was actually at the very, very end, where he said, and not that it's just because it's controversial, he said at the end that liberalism that came out of the 60s has proven to be a more insidious oppression than either slavery or Jim Crow segregation. He said, liberalism wants your very soul. It wants you to be a grateful and mindless captive. You know, and it's like, it was like, whoa, like, I'm not saying I'm going to argue with it, but it just was like, wow, like, what do I make of that? That's like a very big thing that he said at the end. So that, I guess that made me a little uncomfortable because I'm like, I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
Thank you for sharing that. And maybe others will build if you feel like doing so. Jonathan, take it away.
So personally, I mean, the moment when I felt the most tension, like internally in the film, was, I believe, was the local NAACP spokesman, who was talking about how these social policies had created a generation and generations of Black people who were not, oh gosh, what was the phrase? And even he had to rephrase it, but that they didn't have the skill set to be, you know, successful in society. And that, you know, if we take him at his word, if we believe this is truth, that is something that personally I have discomfort with, to look at a group of people, especially something that's not exclusively a cultural group. We're not talking about a self, you know, sorting group like this, but a racial group. And to be able to make this generalization and sit with that, I think that is something that's discomfort. But sitting in reflection, I think I also have discomfort with the fact that the filmmaker is casting those with opposing viewpoints in bad faith, and saying that they want to have this story that wraps everything up so nicely, while at the same time presenting a cohesive conservative worldview around race relations and the troubles that Black Americans have. So I think that is that hypocrisy there. He's so slick, it's so smooth, it's so good, but on reflection, that's the second area where I felt discomfort.
Wow, thank you. All right, John, you are next, sir. Oh, and you're muted, I think.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. How you doing? My discomfort was twofold. One was an old familiar feeling. The other one was a new one. The old familiar feeling was in the past, I've had experience teaching students from Newark and Patterson, Irvington, Trenton. For those of you guys not from New Jersey, you still probably have heard of those places. And I had a very, very emotional time teaching in those environments, because I would say that rather than receive a measured, well-presented version of the topic in this documentary, I was kind of overwhelmed by, you know, jumping in the deep end and immersing myself in it, and really being overwhelmed by, you know, how not familiar I was with, you know, with the circumstances of my students and their families. But the second possible point of discomfort that I found the most interesting as I monitored it while I was watching the documentary is that current tension in very modern America that exists whenever you're participating in a potentially controversial topic, a polarizing topic. And I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but even with no one else in the room, no one to raise another viewpoint, I feel an anxiety, like an anticipating of there being trouble with what somebody says. So as he stated more and more his own personal viewpoint, my only odd discomfort was the feeling of like, oh, don't say that, you're going to get in trouble. It's a weird feeling to have, but it's really a feeling that led me to seek out Braver Angels, to seek a more measured, safe space for people to share their viewpoints. And I guess so that discomfort I felt while watching it, over being able to see someone present a potentially controversial viewpoint, it reminded me why I sought Braver Angels out.
That's really awesome to hear. Thank you, John. Thanks for sharing that personal touch as well. And Carolyn, you're going to be our last one on this question. I'm going to chime in briefly on this one as well before we shift gears a little. Go for it, Carolyn.
I found it well put together. I'm not sure I would go as far as slick, but it was the production values were high. It was well reasoned. And I wish I was faster in my thinking and recalling, because I know enough about redlining, about the placement of the interstate highway systems when that was first developed, to know that that was a very simplistic presentation of the issues around how race has impacted many of the laws that have affected how successful people of color can be in this country. And I just, it was too one-sided for me. So that was my reaction. I would love to hear, because I don't think where I am, which is a far left liberal, is necessarily the right place either. And I one of the reasons I joined Braver Angels is to really encounter and moderate my views towards the middle. But I think that was so, there were so many factors that were left out of that, and there was so cleaned up and simplified that I found it a problematic presentation.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah. And I think you hit on one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we touch on this question. I mean, I think people coming from different political perspectives are obviously going to be uncomfortable for very different reasons. And I think one thing I can assure you from being in Braver Angels a lot is people here often have very extensive backgrounds in history and politics, whether they're amateur or professionals. And as someone who, on an amateur basis studies history and has both academically, but also on my own a lot for many years, I also found a lot of history missing. And that was hard to see, is that like it was a one-sided version of some of the history present. Not that any of it was wrong, but just that there weren't two sides shared. And I'll share one other quick thing, and this will come up a little bit later. But at the moment that in the film, when the I guess narrate, I think it was, oh no, sorry, it was one of the people he was interviewing says that Mike Brown didn't value his life, and that was related back to the idea of government programs. I thought that is, there are facts like government programs, and then there are philosophical arguments and beliefs like, oh, this was caused by this, And I was definitely challenged by the idea that we can assume we know someone's intentions, especially someone who's dead. That to me, it seems like it's a wise idea to either show evidence or to have some sort of data behind that when you make such a big statement. That wasn't about Shelby Steele, by the way. That was about someone in the film who said that statement to share that, like, oh, this is why this person didn't value his life. I thought, whoa, like, we don't actually know if someone valued his life or not, unless we have some sort of background behind that. I'm going to pass it to Liz, who has a really good question about our overall reactions to the film as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to build on something that Caroline pointed out, Molly, because this exact same thing happened to us a couple nights ago when we were setting up for this. And it is around the whole, like, the Pruitt-Igoe Housing Authority. So I feel like as someone who leans red, it's like we have this version of facts that's sort of around, well, there was this vision, if we could put people into into housing, public housing, that would cause the problem. And then sort of the counter on that you kind of hear coming from more blue leaners is like, oh, well, it was because of the highway system, and these people were forced out of their homes, not by their choosing or not by the government's creation. So I feel like when you come upon these moments of like, if we could maybe take a deeper dive into that in some other forum, I think that would be super interesting, because it's like, these are some of our own internal narratives that we live by that maybe keep us apart and prevent us from getting together, and really talking about these problems. So it was just interesting, Caroline, that you brought that up. And that was the exact same sort of a little bit of tension that Molly and I had a couple nights ago. So thank you for bringing that up. And so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. And this is on a similar theme, talking about our aha moment. So we talked a little bit about what surprised us and things like that. Did anyone have a moment in the film where you were like, wow, that really makes sense now? Or I never really came at it that way. Anyone would like to share their aha moments? Okay, I see, let's see, Penny. Unmute, there you go.
Hi. My aha moments came from hearing or reading the testimony of the grand jury witnesses. I had never read what the actual witnesses to the shooting had said, and hearing that these were all people in the neighborhood, that their safety had been threatened for speaking up. I hadn't heard any of that. And based on what they described, I can't know, what was in someone's head, someone who has passed away, but as someone who was a very troubled and suicidal teenager, his behavior certainly seemed to be that of a kid that was extremely troubled and did not value his life and put himself in terrible harm's way and just didn't seem to care, based on his actions that the eyewitnesses reported. I mean, he just seemed to have an attitude, go ahead and shoot me. And that I found heartbreaking too, because I can empathize with that. I can relate to that kid. And it broke my heart that there's been a lot of effort put into demonizing the police, and they're no better than slave catchers, and they're all white supremacists. And an issue that's been ignored is the mental distress and the suffering that a lot of these kids have who don't feel like they have any hope for the future. For whatever reason, I don't even care so much what the reason is. That these are young people that don't see any hope for themselves. And this is a kid who had struggled in school. I could relate to that. I struggled terribly in school. So I found myself empathizing much more with Mike Brown and heartbroken for him. And also sad that I almost felt like he'd been exploited a bit by everyone involved. Like, oh, he's a symbol of a bad kid that deserved to get shot, or he's a symbol of a good kid that was murdered. And he was a child that was troubled and did not get the help he deserved. And that was my aha moment, just hearing his actual behavior before he was killed.
Thank you for that, Penny. Yeah, good observation. Next up, we have Scott. Oops, where'd he go?
Yep.
Scott,
hey, a couple of things that jumped out more, but statistically, when Shelby Steele was talking about the 1960s and how the average home in the Ferguson or St. Louis area in the African-American community was around $8,000 and the white community was around $9,000. I thought, well, that was sort of within 10%. That was really close. He also noted how poverty rate in the Black community had fallen dramatically during, leading up to about 1960. And my prevalence of husband and wife in the household was very high during that period of time. Those are just some statistical moments that were very striking. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Scott. Okay, I see Joseph Stein. You want to unmute yourself? There you go.
Thank you. I'm going to identify myself. I lean slightly to the red. I am an attorney who has been a police legal advisor for several years, about 20 years ago. So I've been in with the police department and seen the good and bad of police departments. My aha moment was showing them when you peel away the emotions, you peel away the rhetoric, when you peel away the hysteria, there is certainly another story here. And it seems to me what he was portraying was really a rush to judgment. people come in from the outside, the Al Sharptons of the world, sometimes Jesse Jacksons of the world, and see this as a black-white confrontation with racial connotations. Sometimes there are. But in this case, and I think many others, not all, but some, there is really not a racial animus involved in this. There's something else going on. And I think Shelby Steele, who was not trying to be balanced, he's a conservative writer, was trying to give that perspective. So when you peel away the rhetoric and you peel away the hysteria, there was, and just looked at the cold hard facts, there was really compelling evidence that he shows that this was not a racial animus killing whatsoever. This was an officer who was acting in self-defense by someone who wouldn't stop. So it was an aha moment to me, because when I've seen unfortunate, really horrific racial tensions and riots, I'm old enough to remember the riots after the Rodney King horrific beating in South Central Los Angeles. I'm that old. But when I see these incidents, and I see the horror that comes out, I always suspicion that there's another story there that's not being shared, and Shelby Steele shared that other story.
Thank you, Joseph. I see Janice Dickinson. I don't believe we've heard from you yet this evening, have we? You wanna, yeah, you're up next.
I had a couple of aha moments. I just have to say, I started off as fairly liberal before I joined Braver Angels, and now I would call myself very moderate, very purple. And I think this movie, I just had aha moment after aha moment of what I've been experiencing in my time with Braver Angels, and it just sort of put things together. One of the big ones for me was the protests. I've been feeling really uncomfortable with what happened with the protests, for example, after George Floyd was killed, that it ended up being so destructive to, and very much to Black people and Black people inner city businesses, and just that discomfort I've had. And I thought that the movie really showed how the issue just gets hijacked. And then once it gets hijacked, there's no going back. Mm-hmm. And I think as a liberal, I think I've been feeling that with liberalism in general. I just did a debate in Washington State about the police reform laws. And I was surprised at how the people that were the most, I recruited speakers for the debate, and the people that were the most unkind and stonewalled me and treated me poorly were the liberals, because they didn't want to talk to me. They would just stop communicating with me. And I thought I didn't understand where some of that was coming from. And I think this movie to me gave me more, I'm not sure I'm making sense, but it gave me
yes.
It gave me more foundation to understand why I'm so uncomfortable with my own liberalism at the moment. So it made so much sense. I thought it was an incredible experience for me. I'm grateful that you are doing this, because I wouldn't have watched it otherwise.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing in your community. That's so important. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to go to Janie, because we haven't heard from Janie yet. And then we'll finish up with John and Craig, and then we'll move on to the next question.
I'm Janie, and I lean purple as well. But I think the thing that surprised me most was, and this may have been obvious to everyone else, but just the realization of how much power is taken away from a person when they have no ownership. And I think it was when, in the example of the apartment building, where the people actually owned the apartments and the government came in and, you know, and good intent, the producer didn't always seem to think that it was good intent, but I would assume that they thought they were helping, and they rebuilt the apartment buildings, but the people no longer owned them. So just that, you know, mulling over that thought of ownership does create empowerment, and it really gave me fodder for thought, his perspective on that. Now, I didn't know if they paid the people for their apartments, the $8,000, or, and I don't know if I missed that or not, but anyway, that was surprising to me and really helped me think about it. further.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Janie, for that. John, and then Craig, and then we're on to the next one. John.
My comment is just to kind of link to predominant messages that I heard, one being the simplification or not simplification of the point or the message. And then very strongly, I respond to what I hear of the mental health of Michael Brown. So if there's any way that the movie simplified something, and really it can only do so much, but if there's a point that you can kind of make your own documentary about, it would be the mental health component. I'm a mental health advocate, also, I said, with ties to Trenton and friends in Trenton. And if there's anything I've noticed here locally is the conversation when I point it towards the need for mental health in inner cities like Trenton, the conversation runs dry. And when I hear about the concern over the statement that Michael Brown didn't value his life, when you bring it out to the I think the questions that I don't know, the woman, about two people before me, I guess it was, about why does a young person feel like that, regardless of you know, which side is describing him. There's a mental health crisis, I believe, and specifically in environments like the inner city.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. And then Craig. And then before Craig goes, there is some information in the chat about government using eminent domain from one of our participants, if you want to see that there. Okay, Craig.
Thank you. So, Janice, I'm like you. I wouldn't say I'm purple yet, but I'm over the last year, I've been sort of on a journey from being a very solid Democrat. I'm still a Democrat, but I'm starting to lean more conservative on certain issues, and race is one of them. And so this movie kind of reinforced some of the things that I had already been thinking about. But my aha moment, I guess, was I didn't realize that the acquittal of the police officer and that the evidence behind that was so strong. And I just had sort of forgotten, I probably read the news, but that, you know, Eric Holder and the Justice Department came out and said, no evidence, you know, and, you know that if Eric Holder comes out and says no evidence, there's probably no evidence, you know, and given that, because Holder's, you know, Black liberal attorney general. So I guess my aha moment was there's no evidence, and yet years after, there's people in Ferguson still protesting and still demanding that the store be closed down. It was like, well, what's the anger about? Like, what exactly are you protesting about? And I'm not criticizing them, because I'm sure that they're very angry about a lot of things. And they probably have the right to be angry about a lot of things. But what are you angry about? Like, and what exactly are you doing with your anger? You know, it's just, that was sort of my aha moment. And that whole theme kind of tied the rest of the film together for me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, thank you for that. Back to that poetic truth, and then there's a little bit of there's some information in the chat too, some feedback there. Okay, all right, switching gears again. Molly, you've got a question?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to just check in. People have alluded to this actually already, and I'll put it in the chat as well. Obviously, you know, in an hour and 49 minutes, you can only cover so much. And so, you know, Shelby Still was obviously making a case, and that case, well, I'm not going to speak to it. I'm just going to put the question in the chat. So what I'm kind of curious to hear from folks is, what was missing for you while you're watching the movie? Like, what do you wish had been said, or what do you think was like this? What would have made it a more complete story for you? Yeah, whether in the message or in the background he offered, and the people interviewed, and the variety of opinions presented, you know, who they were from and who they weren't from, you know. So this is something I always like to look at in a story, like what's not there, which is kind of the hardest thing to look at, is what's not there, especially if you feel like that is the whole story. I would encourage you to, push yourself and think deeper, like what wasn't told. So I'm going to stick that in the question right now, in the chat right now. And just think to yourself, what was not said? I know there's a lot of historical knowledge, like I said, amidst Braver Angels, of all backgrounds. And I really admire that about us. So love to hear some of that story. Yeah, Butch, bring it on. And you're still muted, unfortunately.
I have profound sadness for the situation that we have with, I'm just going to call it the Black community for simplicity. We keep trying the same thing and it doesn't work. And in the most recent times, not only does it work, but the riots that occur after it just compounds the possible solutions. And I don't know where we go. I mean, I'm on the right side. I don't mean the color red, but I'm very, very sad that our world has not been able to deal with this problem. And the solutions that we have, in my mind, are just making it worse. Now, in terms of what's missing, I would like to have had a little bit of a chapter's worth of, even without facts, his opinions about what do we have to do? What really should the world be thinking about, other than liberals are bad or whatever I think he was talking about. But to me, I would like to have seen, he's a brilliant guy. I would like to have seen a little bit more of that. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Sheila?
Yeah, thank you. I have one comment in terms of what I would have liked to have seen, somewhat along the lines of what was just mentioned. Shelby still has a long history of doing some pretty amazing things and a background that shows what has been successful in other Black communities, particularly those from the Caribbean, where people stayed together as families. They were allowed to be, even though they may have been slaves, they were allowed to have stores and be entrepreneurial and really survive. And I think that would have given another or an additional angle to the story had people been exposed to some of that. But I think it's very difficult in a short period of time to do that. So that's really another kind of chapter, but that might have completed it a little bit more. And then, related to that, to some extent, it's not, when we think about what surprised us about the film, I think what we typically read in the media and what's kind of out there and kind of the narrative that's out there, that is one side. This is perhaps another side. So I think it's not the onus on him necessarily to tell all of the other sides here. He's giving a particular perspective with the facts that he knows to be true and really with his own experience. There's plenty of media out there, and it's probably for us more to judge, which media do we believe or who's got the facts? And we could ask the same question of all the rest of the media, or virtually all the rest of the media, of why aren't they also bringing in the other side? So I don't think he necessarily has a burden to do that in this particular movie.
Thank you very much. Don, you are next.
Okay. What I thought was missing was they should have delved more into the personal life and personal background of Michael Brown. Who is Michael Brown, and why is he the person he is, or the person he was on the day he died? And I learned a couple things in the film. Number one, he was living with his grandmother. Okay, so where's mom and dad? And this seems to be a common thread with troubled youth of all colors. Where's mom, and especially where's dad? Apparently not in his life. The other thing I learned was that Michael Brown went to 4 different high schools. Okay, so I think they should have talked to the principals and the teachers or the coaches of those high schools and to give their perspective on what went wrong with Michael Brown. I mean, apparently he was 6'4" 300-pound guy who didn't like anybody telling him what to do. You know, how did that come about? And I just think they should have gone more into that background that led Michael Brown to his death, contributed to his death. We need families. We need moms and dads involved in their children's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not going to happen, we're going to continue to go down this path with all these programs, but we have to reestablish the nuclear family. That's what I took away from the film.
Thank you. It's really interesting to see the diversity of opinions here. Karen, can you unmute yourself? You got to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So y'all have identified yourself by color. So whatever the opposite of red is, I'm the opposite, going off the far deep end. But I also work in this area. And so I'd like to share the information of what we have changed here in St. Louis in the state of Missouri. In this area of town where he was arrested, I don't think in the movie it ever stated why the policeman stopped him. Did any of y'all pick up on that?
I did not.
Okay. And Sheila Zellinger's husband raised his finger, so maybe he has a reason. But the reason he was stopped was because he was walking in the street. That is against the law in Ferguson. It is still against the law. It is a law that I hope that we can have changed. I walk in the street every night with my husband. I live in a high-income part of town. We go walking. We don't want to walk on the sidewalks because they're icy. That part of town, and if you go back and you look at the movie and you look at the footprint of that particular development, surrounded by trees, it's no main streets, no arterials nearby. It's all private streets within the subdivision where it's developed on that parcel. And there's absolutely no reason why somebody shouldn't be walking in the street, but that's the law, and that's why he was stopped. The other thing they don't allow up in that area where there's lots of kids are no portable basketball play sets on any of the cul-de-sacs or any of the developments that have the kids and the apartments. And I'm talking about the kind you roll into the street, you play, and then you can roll it back out against the law. So those are two laws that seem like they're real minor, right? So you question whether someone should be killed because of minor infractions of the law. The two laws that we managed to change here in Missouri is the percentage of revenue that a municipality, and Ferguson fell into this, and that's what they had to change. And that's one of the recommendations that Eric Holder and some of the recommendations that we made with the Bar Association statewide, is that they may not support a majority of their municipal revenue by issuing tickets. And that's how that's how the police were supported. That's how the tax base was supported, was by issuing tickets. This was not a moving violation. This was somebody walking in the street. The second thing that we have managed to change, if a person is low income and they cannot pay the ticket, you cannot now in the state of Missouri throw them in jail on a warrant and charge them per day for staying in jail. And so we have made arrangements for alternative community service. We've made all sorts of alternatives. But what was happening is we have, and we still have problems when they're a rural area where persons are fined $25 a day. They stay in there. While they're in there, they lose jobs because they're in there. They lose family connections because they've got to have somebody pay a cash bond, and someone can't come up with the cash bond. I was raised with grandparents also. So I don't think that being raised with grandparents, which is very common in many different communities. His grandmother lived half a mile away from the apartment where he was at. The kids go back and forth between Canfield and from his grandmother's apartment complex. They're very connected through those woods. So anyway, I just wanted y'all to know that I don't think that when we look at minor infractions, that the outcome of that, I don't care who you are, I don't care how big you are, what color you are, I don't think that that should have resulted in the death of a person. And if that policeman had received the training, which is the other thing that we are requiring, our policemen were changing, and our prosecutor has done this both in the city and in the county, how to train the police when they don't know how to engage with somebody. They now have a team that they can call that specializes, that knows how to engage persons, whether it's mental illness, whether it is pure meanness. We'll assume just purely mean, whatever. They are specialized psychologists, and they come in with the police, and they know how to engage a person. What happened was, and you didn't get this in the story, and there's a link that I can share, but the history of it was the police car pulled in front of him, cut him and his friend off, unrolled down the window, and they were like, whoa. And what would you do if somebody, anybody, police or anybody, pulled physically in front of you while you're walking the street, block you where you're walking? And that would scare me. And I suspect it might have scared that young man. And probably in response to fear, he showed anger. And so he's yelling at the policeman, and then he's walking away. And that's when the whole thing began to escalate. And that's what I don't expect an 18-year-old male to necessarily know how to de-escalate that kind of situation, but I do have that expectation for our police. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take one more person. Thank you, Karen. Just because I want to share something before 9, when some people might need to go for the State of the Union. I'll fix that link. Thank you, Lane. Van, we have not heard from you yet, so I'd actually like you to go for now. And go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, my understanding of why the police stopped him was because there was an incident at a nearby store.
No, that happened the day before, and he had no knowledge of it.
Well, that's what I've heard, and he apparently met the description of the person that had caused trouble at that store, and that's why the police had followed up. That's what I've heard.
No, and I've heard that in the media, but once we gathered the information, the gentleman who shot him did not have knowledge at the time that he cut him off on the street.
I think I'm going to invite people to share links about what happened the night before and whether someone knew, whether the police knew that. Feel free to share those links in the chat, because I'd rather us use evidence that we're talking about that will be helpful, since we're clearly citing different articles, it sounds like. Yeah, and actually, because we have 3 minutes, I'm gonna chime in. I'll let the 2 other people speak who have hands up. But the person who we invited to speak tonight, and unfortunately just couldn't because of having an emergency last-minute visit to a clinic, is Janelle Burke. If people don't know her, she's a wonderful woman who is the Red co-leader of the Braver Angels of Color Coalition. Do I have that right, Liz? Yeah. Yes. Janelle is actually from Ferguson. I hope to have her at a future event instead, both because of her background with Ferguson, her leadership as the head of the Braver Angels of Color Coalition, and also she's Michael Brown's second cousin. And so she knows a lot about the family because she's in the family. And we had hoped to have her here tonight. Angels of Color Caucus. Thank you, Luke. If any of y'all are people who identify of color, please join the Angels of Color Caucus. That would be great to have more members in it, or I'll invite friends to join it as well. And Janelle will hopefully, I don't know how we're going to do this, Liz and I will talk offline, but hopefully be able to visit an event in the future. There is a movie we may do in the next couple months, not next time, but in a couple months or so, that would be very relevant for Janelle to come on to. So hopefully we'll bring her back in. But she is the surprise guest who unfortunately had an emergency. But I just wanted to mention her as well. And also, I thought, having her on, we all kind of felt like it'd be a good reminder, like this is someone's cousin. That was a real statement. I'm also from St. Louis, and Karen is as well, is in local government there. Okay, Roy Vela, I'd love to call on you, Roy.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly weigh in that this movie, and for me, this is all about the tinderbox. So, and I find it frustrating that all these events, it's kind of not about the event. I mean, in fact, he started off talking about all the young black men dying and mostly shooting each other, and it's not about the one death. It is. I'm not saying Michael Brown's life wasn't valuable or all that, but it's about the fact that we have created and live in a tinderbox, and any little spark, you know. And I hear people complaining about the riots and the you know, the illegal activity that follows this, but that's like, you know, blaming the fire for all the tinder. Like, I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying we just have created an environment that this is the natural result. And George Floyd, and you can just, there's a laundry list, and what we see after is sort of what you get from, you know, decades of mistreatment. And it's just frustrating. And I'm with a lot of people saying, like, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I am sure that the answer is not more violence in either direction.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think, Roy, you hit on something that, like, I didn't mention this earlier, but that also was a source of discomfort for me, is like a lot of things I think in the movie are like sort of an issue about that case that he extrapolates to be about the broader issue. And I wasn't sure where to go with that. So,
and thank you, Lane, for the correction. You're right. It's centuries of mistreatment. It's not decades. It's decades in the sense of people's living memory, but you're right. It's a cultural thing that goes back centuries.
Thank you. And Stephen, you are going to be the last person. Then we have a really big question to bring up for the next one. And with all due respect, I know people need to go. Some people may need to go, so please feel free to duck out if you need to. And also keep in mind there will be a recording of this as well. We are recording. Yeah, go for it, Stephen.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I just had one last comment before I run to the State of the Union. You know, I think a couple of folks have sort of hit on this, but you know, one of the aha things for me is not so much that the director left out certain things, you know, in order to make his point. We all do that. Any storyteller does that. Any writer does that. Whenever we tell a story, trying to persuade someone or even just to inform, we all do that. So that's not really, that wasn't surprising. I think if we pull back the lens, just like Steele did, I think what we have to see is that the facts about the case, you know, if we can to the best that we can determine what the facts are, that wasn't really what the story was about. It has once this got out, within the context of Ferguson and St. Louis and America and racism, and I mean, you just name it. There's so much there, like the person that talked about the tinderbox. You know, I wouldn't characterize it as a tinderbox, but I think that the story just sort of takes a life of its own. And when Eric Holder came in, yeah, it really wasn't necessarily about the story of Michael Ferguson and what happened to Michael Ferguson. Michael Brown. It really became a much larger story. It turned into that. And this story reveals that there are all kinds of truths and multiple stories that each one of us have a part in. And we're all trying to make sense of something, and we all come with our background. And so in the sense that we can ever get to the real facts behind the case, gosh, I'm not sure if we can. And I'm not sure that that's really the point anyway. It's sort of what takes off and what the story becomes, whether we like it or not.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. That actually is like, you were like a plant that like perfectly leads into our next question. So.
Yeah, I feel like I must have sent you a chat or something to help pivot us. And that was just beautiful, because then I think that's such a Braver Angels statement. I think part of the way we all get to the truth is really listening to each other. And it's impossible for us to have all experiences. So this is the way we learn and get a better perspective, or a maybe more accurate perspective on things. So thank you for that. So building on that, so the next question, and I'll post it in the chat, is so let's think about thinking about this film and the concepts of poetic truth and objective truth. So maybe broadening out a little bit. So in the future, because I'm pretty sure this is not the last time this type of incident happens in our country or in our world. And so in the future, when this happens, let's share with us how you think we can get past maybe the initial or the poetic truth to more of an objective truth. What can we do as people? How might we help others get past that? How might we listen differently? So I'm going to post that. And then as you all are thinking about that, I'm also going to take sort of the privilege here of posting another story, which is another story about poetic truth, which was a Barry Weiss story about the Central Park Karen. So if anyone's ever interested in reading that or hearing about that story, that was another one that stood out to me. So so we're looking for anyone who wants to chat about poetic truth and objective truth and how we get there. Okay, I see Craig, Angela. I'm going to pick on Angela first, and then Craig. There you go.
So I'm not sure how this answers it, but early on when those things were mentioned, I felt like, well, I just think that for me, two of the things that floated up out of the whole thing that I watched, whether they were intentional or not, I haven't had enough time to figure that out, but were these what I think of as maybe society-wide emotions, and one of them is what I think he implied motivates poetic truth, and that was referred to in some of the discussions of others, is just the overall anger from 200 years of all of these things happening to people, and because of their color. And so I think that's something that just exists in society that we have not found. I don't know that we ignore it. I've read, that people think that it's ignored. Maybe it is, but I just think that we've been clumsy and unable to address it. Some other cultures have managed to do that. Germany, for example, has done some work on reconciliation and South Africa has tried to do that. And I think from what I've read that they may have had some success. I don't know. I don't have any answers to anything, but Butch had mentioned, we're all at a loss. I think he felt frustrated from it. I do. I'm sure many people do. We just have to look for something out of the box, something we haven't tried, and look at maybe a larger issue. And that emotion is just there that people may or may not even be aware of in themselves. And the other emotion that came through was the white guilt. I'm not sure how that would figure into things either. I have no idea. Maybe they kind of go together. But anyhow, those are just two observations that I made. And so that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And he does talk about overlaying the past on the present, was a quote that I had written down in my notes. So thank you for that. Craig, you're up next.
Thanks. So, the answer I have to this question is actually very simplistic, but I just want to take advantage of my airtime to just mention that, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm learning a lot from different people's input and perspectives. I guess what I'm starting to see now is you know, when we talk about objective truth versus, I mean, subjective truth versus poetic, I mean, objective versus poetic, there's so many different themes that emanated out of the Michael Brown incident. You know, there's what actually happened that day. There's, you know, what the other individuals said about, you know, policing practices that can contribute or lead to unfortunate incidents, right? There's, you know, anger in the society. There's cancel culture. You know, there's all these things that come out of this, So there's all these like layers, right, of issues that come out. And then a lot of that, some of that's poetic and some of it's objective. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated, you know, but just to answer your question very simply, I think the way to do that is that we as consumers of news just have to keep in mind that everything you see has many layers to it. And I, you know, I'm reminding myself of that. So anything that happens, don't take it at face value and don't, you know, personally, right? Let's not do that. But the also thing is that the media has a responsibility to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. You know, yes. and easier, both of those things way easier said than done. But I mean, I think that's the simple answer to an extremely complicated problem.
Yeah, being more careful consumers of information for sure. Thank you for sharing that. Kathleen, you're up next.
So the question about how you get, I think the question was, sorry, remind me, objective truth to poetic truth and how we parse and get to that. Mm-hmm. So I actually don't live in the States. I live in Canada. So perhaps I can offer, you know, my perspective might be a little different in that history isn't the same. And where I find my dilemma is what I would consider the left we haven't defined where they've gone too far. And I see a lot of the ideas that picked up the narrative and flew with it. And the director mentioned that race now is used, and I believe his words were for a power player, or it's a tool. So a lot of those sets of ideas they're as rich in your universities as they ever could be. And where do university students go but off to law, politics? So we have that issue in our universities. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen what my children have been taught. I took a course and was taught certain things that to me don't even hold a slight evidence. They're so this is to me where the big problem is. The horse is out of the barn. And I don't know where, like, I must say, when I hear individuals in this room have come from more, I can't say the red blue because we're the opposite. So I get very confused, but from what I would say the left, when I hear people sort of distancing themselves, the left has to me created an environment where even watching this movie as a white person is like terrified. Like, the whole mindset is, I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody in this room has the wrong melatonin. I am terrified of the set of ideas that govern my country, and they're strong. And anyway, I don't know how we get that, but addressing those sets of ideas to me is key to it. And the universities that are churning out people who hold these as the truth is part of where I see us getting a grasp on this.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen. And yeah, I mean, everyone who's here, I just want to say I have so much respect for everyone that's shown up tonight. This is hard stuff to watch, and to have the courage to come here and speak no matter what side you're on, and for all of us to hear one another. I think we're all doing a great job with a pretty tough topic. So thanks. Phyllis Carpenter, you're up next.
Hi there. I'm new to Braver Angels, so I'm not quite understanding this poetic truth and objective truth, and come from a world where I believe there's one truth. And I think, only speaking for the Michael Brown case, first I want to thank the woman from Ferguson who explained what he got pulled over for, because I kind of picked that up at the beginning of the movie, that he was walking in the street. And I kept waiting for the narrator to explain, well, why did they put, he was walking in the street. Okay, what happened then? And obviously that was the problem. My only concern is to get to the truth. I'm in a suburb of Chicago. Our police are all fitted with cameras, and the camera is to be on whenever there's any interaction. And what we get in Chicago a lot is, oh, well, my camera wasn't working for that 5 minutes. But if they wear the cameras, you would have heard exactly what he said to Michael. You would have heard what Michael said to the officer, and you would have seen, was he coming towards him? Did he grab him in the police car? Did he run away? Did he? You would have seen, and that would have been the truth. Instead of this, he said, they said. Eyewitnesses are the least reliable people usually. If you ask any lawyer going to any court, you can have 3 eyewitnesses to the exact same case. Mm-hmm. They all have a different perspective. So my solution, if I were an officer, to cover myself, I would make sure that camera is on anytime I had any dealing with anyone. And that way I can go to my, my captain or whatever and say, here's the film. You listen to it. You look at it. Did I cross a line or didn't I? Mm-hmm. So this idea, I don't know if you're in favor of this idea that there's poetic truth and objective truth. I don't buy that. Mm-hmm. I buy one truth, and that's it. Thank you. And thank you for giving Braver Angels. I love it.
Mm-hmm. And it's the poetic and objective truth was a part of the film that Shelby talks about, and how, there was the hands up, don't shoot was sort of the poetic truth versus what, and to your point around what the witnesses and what the investigation found out. So that's a little bit more background to the poetic versus objective truth that Shelby was talking about. But yeah, for sure, cameras helps with the evidence for sure. And then Jonathan Cohen, you're up next.
So, I mean, if we want to say is how do we get past the poetic truth? I mean, the glib, but I think truthful answer would be a 24-hour moratorium on cable news and maybe 1 or 2 week moratorium on social media. That there is like an obsession with wanting to come out and talk and be seen as being on the right side and the right attitude. Now, this is undemocratic. This is not right, not going to happen. I know there is some actual work to reform some of these social media systems, but I don't put much stock in that. I think as a society, I mean, it's very hard, but we'll need to put less value in feelings. And more value in progress and improving systems and in making actual progress rather than in feelings. I'm a teacher. I am very much a soft love kind of guy. I want all my students to feel good. But if there's a time where I will hurt a student's feelings, but it's for their improvement so that they actually know that they know what the improvement is, they know what can be done, I have to sacrifice my desire for having everyone happy to make sure we get for my students' long-term good. And that's hard. That is hard. And in America, our society, we don't want to do that. We want everyone to feel good. That's what is, and I think that's tied up in all that social media as well. But I think a lot of room for improvement was squandered in the 3 months after George Floyd was murdered. I live here in Minneapolis, already a very liberal city, and everyone took several large steps to the left side. And I would say probably everyone in this room felt that same way, is that when that happened, kind of was shocked that, hey, at least on these racial issues, maybe we need to reevaluate. And I just think that there was more interest in listening to how people feel instead of making actual improvements to systems that affect all of us.
Yeah. Great point. And thank you so much for teaching. We have a young man in our alliance here in North Carolina who's teaching and doing great work. So we really appreciate that. And we need more people like you. You're making a huge impact. So thank you. And we're going to do one more on this topic. Well, two more. We'll do Penny and Joseph, and then we're going to move to our next topic. So Penny, you're up.
Hi. I don't know how much this relates to poetic or objective truth, but I think it would be helpful to not show these horrifically dehumanizing videos over and over again. I have never watched George Floyd murdered. I will not watch George Floyd murdered. I think it is the most dehumanizing, horrifying thing that could be done to a human being. If I'm murdered in that way, I don't want videos of that all over the media. I think that triggers such a hysterical fight or flight reaction in people that we can't think straight. And when we can't think straight, when we're reactive, we become dangerous. Mm-hmm. We start demonizing each other. And I think I don't think any of this rhetoric that is coming out about racial issues has been helpful at all to the Black community. And there's this idea that there's this chunk called the Black community and it's over here. That's not true. I mean, most of us have dear loved ones. Some of the people we love most are members of the so-called Black community, which means we're also members of the Black community. What is killing me about the way race is talked about is Black people are only 13% of the population. That's not likely to change. There's a lot of anti-Black racism also among Hispanic people and Asian people and white people. You know, it's not like the browning of America is going to suddenly save Black people from racism. A lot of the suffering that you see in Black communities are largely based on historical racism and systemic racism keeping people in poverty. And you see some of the same types of suffering and levels of violence and painful cultural issues among poor whites, poor Hispanic. You know, Black people are not a different species. Black people are us. They're like us. We're made of the same stuff. And this idea of separating Black people into this little corner over here, I think serves both the upper middle class people, both the left and the right, because then we don't have to look at this horrific, income inequality, the middle of the country gutted. And the fact that most poor people are actually white in this country, the majority. I mean, Black people are more likely to end up poor because of racism, but most poor people are white. And so,
Penny, we're at 2 minutes, but yeah, okay. Do you want to say one last wrap up, or are you good?
I want to wrap it up by saying, let's stop separating people by race and start looking at their lived experience, the circumstances of their lives. An upper middle class Black person is not in the same position as a poor Black person, but a poor Black person is very much in a very similar situation to a poor white person. So can we please look at objective truth and lived material
common
reality.
Humanity, yes.
Common humanity, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Penny. All right, and the last on this question, or close to this question, is Joe Stein, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Liz. First, I want to say I'm an attorney here in Southern California, and some of the finest professionals in terms of judges and attorneys I've run into have been African Americans. I have the highest respect for them because some of them are consummate professionals. I couldn't say enough good things about them. And one of them remains a very close friend of mine. In terms of how we deal with this and to get to objective truth, I think one of the factors, and it's difficult to do, but it's essential, is that we don't rush to judgment. Regrettably, tragedy, we have not seen the end of things like Ferguson or the horrific George Floyd incident. We're going to have more of these, sadly. I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. And what I am seeing is that too many leaders from the community exploit the situation rather than calm down the passions. I think to a certain extent in the community, I'm sure there are a lot of leaders who don't get a lot of publicity. Many of them would be leaders of the various churches in the area, do what they can to try to keep the passions down until we know really what happened. But I am critical at a larger area, the Al Sharptons of the world, for example. I think many times, rather than look at the objective truth or try to and kind of take a deep breath before intervening, they are there within a day or two, and all of a sudden the incident is exploded. I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would look at it more carefully and more objectively rather than to get into it, because when they do get into it, unfortunately, and that's not their intention, but unfortunately, I think a byproduct of what they do is to make the situation even worse, sometimes to light a match when there's gasoline in the area. So those are my thoughts.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm not sure we're going to have time to talk about it, but there was a whole part of the film that we're likely not going to get to, where the people who are in the community and were doing great things and are doing great things in that community, including Miss Queen was one with children on her porch. There was a pastor, I believe, in a community in Chicago that was highlighted. So there were so many heroes that were discussed in the film, and I don't know that we're necessarily going to talk about them, directly, but I do want to make sure we call those out. All right, Molly, what you got next?
I have the difficult job of doing this in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So just so y'all know, we literally have 7 more questions we didn't get to. I'm going to give you a choice of 2, and I'm going to take about 2 answers. Maybe 3 if you can keep it to a minute. So I'm going to ask people for this one in particular, try to use like a few words or a sentence or 2, just to, because it's a really big question. I want to try to like really distill some high level stuff to a simple sentence or 2 for you, or for you to do that for yourself, I mean. So the questions I'm going to do, and I don't usually do this, but I'm going to end on 2 because I think they're very closely related, but I also think that one is bigger. So the one big question is, so after seeing the film, what do you think killed Michael Brown? Is like sort of the question of the film, right? And then if you would rather do something bigger picture, what are the biggest messages you took away from the film?
And Molly, would we be okay if people who didn't want to speak, could put that in the chat?
100%.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'll put those 2 in the chat. I also just want to encourage anybody who hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah.
This is your time. This is your big ending. So again, a sentence or 2 if you speak would be helpful, just because we are a very diversely opinionated group, and we managed to spend almost about 1 hour 20 on 5 questions, which I think speaks a lot to who this group is as well. No pressure, but does anyone who hasn't spoken want to chime in here? Maybe a little pressure because I know it's the last few minutes. Yes, Vanessa, please, and Don. It's okay if you have spoken too. I'm going to open the floor. Yeah, Don. Vanessa, go for it.
There was a quote that I wrote down because it was so profound for me. Liberalism's greatest sin was to steal the responsibility for Black problems away from Black people. And there were 2 parts of that. One was, that was so profound, that just really hit me hard. But then on the heels of that, it also bothered me because, again, it portrayed the Black community in a victim's position. And so I thought about that quite a bit and thought that's where the polarization may come from, is white guilt allowing victimization to continue, all the while being hidden under stealing responsibility.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you. Don, go for it.
This isn't exactly related to the question, but I did want to make one comment. We're not supposed to, I agree that we shouldn't always be dividing groups into racial identities, but I couldn't help but observe, we had like 40 people at the height of this conversation, and I saw nothing but white faces except for Lane Cobb. So something like 39 out of 40 people in this conversation are Caucasian or possibly an Hispanic or 2. We're trying to solve a problem, and reach understanding, but I think that we, the Braver Angels maybe should try to reach out to be more, here's that word, inclusive of the Black race. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Janelle was going to help us with that a little bit and tried and recruit. And she's had, we have that caucus, but yes, I agree. I noticed that as well.
Does anyone else want to speak in the last minute here? Or are you going to let us have the final word, which we just certainly don't need to do and don't particularly want to do? So yes, Craig, please.
Just really quickly, I got the feeling at the end of the movie that Shelby Steele was kind of saying that white liberalism killed Michael Brown. I thought that was sort of the message. And I think that is way too simplistic. If that was what he was trying to get us to think, I think that is way too simplistic. Could that have been a piece of it? Yeah. But to just make that indictment, I think, is a huge oversimplification of our complex world.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, wow. Well, I just want to congratulate everybody. It is 9:30. We are gonna end. And yeah, there are definitely multiple people of color. I should mention people who are mixed race, Asian and white. There are people who are of color who don't have cameras on. Just, yeah, thank you. I also just want to flag that, like I mentioned, we might be doing a film that's similar. We have to discuss this one. If people haven't seen it and we don't show it, I'll just encourage people to see the film Uncle Tom, which touches on some issues from this film as well. But we'll be in touch about next time, which actually, announcing next time, I promise to end within a minute, by the way. March 31st, is it, Liz? Common Grounds, ? Is a film about coming together after the Charleston madness. Charlottesville, I said that wrong. Charlottesville madness, if I could call it that. It's a half-hour documentary on YouTube that's free that a bunch of students made when they came together after the population at UVA, University of Virginia, was very divided. And so we'll be discussing that with a professor and some students from UVA, which is super exciting. And that is coming up at the end of March. We're doing 2 in March, so we couldn't find a February date that worked for all of us mods. If this looks fun to you, please reach out. We'd love to moderate with you. It is pretty great. And also shout out to everyone who spoke, who listened, because the tone of this conversation is a tone that I wish Congress had, that I wish people on Facebook regularly had, that I wish everybody discussing race and, mind you, any controversial issue had. I am mad impressed by all of us. Usually I only see this level of maturity among a very tight circle of people I keep in my life, but not among people who don't even know each other necessarily. So I'm immensely impressed and just overjoyed to be part of a controversial discussion on a really hard and challenging topic that was exceptionally grounded and respectful. So thank you. May the country be more like us is what I'm really saying, Anyway, thank you everyone. And please be in touch if you would like to, if you'd like to be a part of the planning of these. We're nice, we have fun, and I would love to invite you as well. And like I said, oh, wonderful. We already got a new mod. I'm so excited. Can I say your name? I won't if you don't want me to. We just landed a new mod just by that conversation. Wonderful. Okay, so everybody, I'll see you, God willing, on the 31st. And if not then, I'll see you next month.